holding 2 bottles of water with exactly 4 seconds remaining before the start of the round as Pragg carefully adjusts his pieces. The first couple of moves are going to be particularly important. A warm handshake by the ceremonial guest there. And we are about to see the ceremonial first move, which is, I think, e2, e4, but that does not mean Magnus will necessarily play e4. The move will be retracted, and then Magnus will make the official first move of the game. And it appears to, in fact, be the move e2, e4.
Yes, it was somehow guessable. I think that also you remember that match against Vincent Keimer in the decisive final game that Magnus won. He went for 1e4. Yeah, he wanted to play the Rui Lopez, and Pragg taking his time doing the Magnus thing, not answering immediately. Is he thinking about, should I play e5 or should I play c5? It's clear that he has already made up his mind before the game, but it's also nice to see Magnus's own medicine being employed against himself.
And as we start this game, before Pragg makes his first move, a big shout out. We have already over 50,000 people watching from every corner of the world, which includes so many of Pragg's fans from his hometown state of Tamil Nadu in India, but also across the world. And of course, Magnus Carlsen, with so many fans that he has generated for decades. This is going to be awesome. Seatbelts fastened, and Pragg's response, the King's Pawn game, e4, e5.
Yeah, e4, e5 on the board, a very professional response. Also was kind of easy to guess. In a very important game, you want to be as solid as possible and wait for your opponent to show his cards. I do believe that Magnus will go for the Rui Lopez. I don't believe that he's going to play the Italian, since Praggnanandhaa has been really involved in a lot of discussions there with Fabiano. And no, 4 knights. All right, that's a surprise.
Whoa. Okay, and now another big choice. Does Magnus play the 4 knights Scotch with d4, or does he handle this traditionally with bishop b5? There's also the move g3, which is known as the Gleck system, very rare at the top level.
Yeah, I don't see Magnus going for g3. If he already goes for the 4 knights, I believe he wants to be as solid as possible. I mean, this g3 kind of stuff leads to double H positions without clarity. I don't think that you really want that in a decisive game right from the start.
Is it fair to say already that Magnus trying to play with an abundance of caution? Because assuming he chooses either bishop b5 or d4, both of those moves, as he does in fact execute bishop b5 on the board, this is a very solid line, right? This is more, this is, one could say, quieter than the traditional Rui Lopez. What conclusions can we make as Pragg drives his knight to d4, the most principled response, the most modern response to the 4 knights game?
The next move will be very important. And wow, okay, Magnus takes knight takes d4. This is like a silent, exactly. This is a silent draw for, or is he trying some e4, knight d5 kind of surprise?
Okay, now e5 is known as the bailout line. It leads to an exchange of knights. It is well known, as you put it very eloquently, a silent draw for my Magnus Carlsen. Or has he found something within the ostensibly quiet waters of this line?
My guess is that he hasn't yet fully recovered. That's kind of my guess. Otherwise, I don't see him ever playing this line. There is a clear purpose to survive today and to feel much better tomorrow.
And Pragg quickly making the forced moves, recapturing an f6 with the queen. And even if you are not acquainted with this line, you can see how symmetrical it is as Magnus recaptures on c3. The pawn structure virtually symmetrical, both sides only with bishops remaining on the board. And bishop c5 here, I think, is considered the most accurate and most active developing move. This has to be maybe not a relief for Pragg, but he can't be unhappy to see this bailout line chosen by Magnus.
For sure, unless there is some really hidden, deep little trick, yeah, because often it's like this, that you think like, yes, it's a harmless line. If my opponent knows everything and Pragg shows a lot of confidence, he blitzes out the move bishop c5. It's the main move. On the other hand, because the line has such a drawish reputation, do you believe that the top players are studying this line? I don't believe so, but you definitely have to know the first couple of moves.
Yeah, it's sort of the rookie one Berlin syndrome, where because, as you're saying, because the line is so drawish, you're less likely to look at it, and you might miss a certain subtlety that puts some pressure on Black's position. But I want that to be the case, maybe, but it really seems a lot likelier that Magnus, still not feeling very well, wants to recuperate his strength, believes in his ability to win these matches in the rapid portion, and just decides to bail the game out. That doesn't necessarily mean he will offer a draw within a couple moves, but I think he's very likely to. Queen e2 check, Peter, is even a more straightforward bailout option because it forces a queen trade. Queen e6 or queen e7 is going to follow. We're going to see the queen swapped. And this doesn't seem to be the kind of endgame that Magnus could really squeeze, much like he did against Vincent Keimer in their second game.
Yes, this is different. Yeah, there is no structure involved. Yeah, the structure is already fixed. The pieces has been traded off. So many things has to happen here. Basically, Black has to cooperate in many very delicate way in order to give White real chances to play for an advantage. On the other hand, Pragg is not taking his time. He understands that, okay, there is simply no reason to hurry. The position is super safe. He's probably also now fighting with himself that what is this? Is Magnus trying to force a draw, or is he hoping for something? And you just want to be very precise, not to give any chances for Magnus to hope for anything.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of deciding between queen e6 and queen e7, after queen e6, White most likely captures on e6, Black recaptures with the f pawn. So we get two slightly different types of pawn structure from Black's side, not from White's pawn structure remains the same in either case. Here the f file opens, which gives Black the option of generating some pressure, but one could argue that there's also a drawback. Maybe the light squared bishop is a little bit harder to deploy because it's kind of buried under the pawn chain. Contrast that with a move queen e7. Here, Black keeps the pawn structure as it currently is, but the downside is that after queen takes e7, you either have to lose castling rights and your king gets stuck in the center, or you have to retract the bishop from its most active developing post. And so Pragg goes for the former option. Queen e6 is on the board.
Yes, queen e6 on the board. It also shows some kind of courage. It was the braver choice. One could have said like, okay, it's very drawish, let me just play queen e7. We don't want to unbalance the situation. We are happy with what we got. The move queen e6 also puts White a little bit in this spot that he has to make up his mind. If he really wants to make a draw, then I'm not sure that queen takes e6, f takes e6 is to White's liking, because the position gets unbalanced. There is suddenly some dynamic in the position. Yes, maybe White can also try to hope for something, but also Black can hope for something. It's a big call, and I understand why Magnus is pausing right now.
So if you want to ensure like the smoothest possible bailout, do you play bishop f4 here instead, trying to maintain the kind of open center so that you can trade off more pawns?
Yes, bishop f4 kind of also invites eventually some queen takes e2, and then you know that, yes, this is the trade I wanted to have. Nothing changed. Probably Black plays this move a6, kicking away the bishop from b5. It's very important so that when White falls back with the bishop, then we can comfortably play d6. The pawn on c7 is nicely protected by the pawn, and then we simply develop. It's even a question, do we want to castle or do we just put the king in the center? There's nothing to worry about.
And Black's position here is a well-oiled machine. I mean, there are no weaknesses. There's no dynamite in the position, as someone in the chat pointed out. It's just very hard to envision two very strong grandmasters not drawing in a position that is so devoid of tactical potential and imbalances. So Magnus, he's taking his time. He's not taking on e6. He hasn't played bishop f4. That seems to be the biggest choice that he has to make here. And I feel like after queen takes c6, the game is likely to last longer, whereas after bishop f4, we might in fact see, a 15-20 move draw.
Yes, and if we look at Magnus, somehow I don't get the feeling that Magnus is interested on taking on e6. Look at his body language. He seems to be sitting there very peacefully. if you kind of play the move queen e6, you are looking for some challenge. Yeah, you want to unbalance the position, but it wasn't really the idea of the whole line. I just believe that he will play something like bishop f4, a neutral move, but we never know.
Yeah, we're just so unused to seeing Magnus, come to the board with the white pieces and opt for, a bailout line this straightforward. But, the fact that you're not feeling well, it changes everything, and even someone like Magnus Carlsen is human, and trying to force yourself to play something imbalanced when your brain isn't working to its fullest potential could actually be a very unwise move, particularly given Magnus's incredible record in tie breaks and in the rapid format. I mean, let's not forget when he defeated Fabiano Caruana in the World Championship match, he took that draw in the last round and arguably a better position. There were a lot of critics of that decision, but then he came back and he won the rapid tiebreaker. On the other hand, Praggnanandhaa has also shown some incredible composure in the rapid tiebreaks. Obviously, too early to talk about that yet. This game is still going, but I mean, all arrows seem to be pointing in the direction that Magnus is not opposed to a peaceful result here.
Yes, the reason I was pausing because it looked like Magnus gonna make a move, and is he?
Yes.
Yes, bishop f4 on the board. The professional move. It is the move that is desired under the circumstances. It's already clear that Magnus just wants to finish this game and not put any real energy into it. Also, yes, people can say, what is this? It's the attitude that he wants to win this match. He really feels like this World Cup means so much, and he believes that going for the tiebreaks is probably the wisest choice under the circumstances he is into. On the other hand, I remember that people were scaring Praggnanandhaa at the start that against Hikaru, you are in a tiebreak, Hikaru is very strong. And then what did Praggnanandhaa say? Well, I'm also strong. And then he went on to knock out Hikaru Nakamura, and later he knocked out Fabiano Caruana in a tiebreak. So he's a special force to reckon with.
Yeah, that first game against Hikaru where he won a piece in the opening and then kept his cool, converted it flawlessly. That honestly epitomizes Praggnanandhaa's run in this tournament. And you could be the best rapid player in the world. One could make a case that Magnus Carlsen is the best rapid player in the world. But, when you start reducing the time control and you start raising the nervous element, you create complete uncertainty. Anything can happen in a rapid game. One small mistake could decide the course of the game. So this is simultaneously an understandable decision, made more understandable if Magnus isn't feeling 100%. At the same time, I think it's good for us, Peter, because we might be getting another day of chess and a rapid tiebreaker to decide the World Cup. I mean, it really does not get any more exciting than that. So yes, I'm a little bit disappointed that we didn't get a Najdorf or we didn't get a Grunfeld, but I do understand Magnus's decision. I think it's a rational decision. And obviously, Prag is not thinking about tomorrow. He's thinking about today. This game is not over yet, and he has to maintain his professionalism in order to make sure that you're not giving Magnus even a sliver of opportunity, much like he did yesterday.
Yes, you have to be professional. Now there is the question, little tiny question. Do you capture on E2? I feel like you would like to clarify the situation, especially after bishop f4. So king takes E2. Another question that, do you play A6? I already mentioned that I like this move A6, not giving any targets for white. And after bishop d3, just playing a move like d6. If white wants to fight, then is he trying h4, h5, eventually f3, and then trying to rely on this bishop on f4, bishop d3? I do recall some ideas like this in the Petrov. There are ideas which Magnus, in fact, wanted to use against Jan Nepomniachtchi in the World Championship match in Dubai. But how much is this? Okay, let's little bit talk about this position just to understand, is this position really so innocent as it looks? Let me play h4.
So h5 would be my instinct here. I feel like that's the principled response, trying to prevent white from expanding on the king side. Is that advisable, or does h5 weaken black's position more than it helps?
Well, it's a question, and it's already a good news that if you are able to ask some questions. The point is that if black plays the move h5, yes, it's very nicely stopping white's advance on the king side. However, maybe eventually the g5 square will be there. I don't know, something like rook he1. We play a move like bishop e6. I guess it's natural. I will have to put... I wanted to somehow try to highlight what I wanted. Okay, if black plays something like this. However, in order to do what I want, it is important not to play like a computer. I want to highlight this. I would like to get something like this. Long castles, rook a1, making sure that my h4 pawn is well guarded by the rook on h1. And then somewhere to play bishop g5. Yeah, for example, if black would now just play a move like rook h8, would be a serious inaccuracy. Then white plays the move bishop g5. And suddenly black is already facing some problems. He has to play probably the move f6. Then we fall back with the bishop. We are settling bishop g6. These are the type of problems people often face in the Petrov. That's what I had in my mind. And I said that maybe with h4 we can ask some small little questions.
And this would be, a dream scenario for Magnus, where he gets an endgame, he's not risking, and he's just kind of able to sit back. I mean, literally, well, he was just sitting back. Now he assumes a more aggressive posture. But a position like this, he can play largely without calculating too much. He can play based on his incredible endgame understanding. And black, already in this position, has long-term weaknesses on the king side that he's saddled with, right? Bishop g6 is a threat. If you drop the bishop back to f7, then maybe white's bishop drops into f5. Maybe white continues to expand with g2, g4. So your point is very well taken, Peter. Black has to be very careful how he arranges his pieces, and black has to be careful not to allow white to expand too much on the king side. So with all of that in mind, if we go back to the current position, right, bishop f4, is there a case to be made for c6, d5, trying to build up a more solid center instead of a6? What do you make of the alternative to push the c pawn instead?
Yes, I think then also important to decide that do you trade on e2 first or do you play c6? Maybe then it's smart to play c6, because I don't really believe that white wants to take on e6 now. Then black already can capture with the d pawn, getting a very nice structure. Certainly an unbalance which white does not thrilled with. And so after c6, we kind of force the bishop back to d3. Then we're going to go d5. And it's kind of nice that we haven't decided yet. We are waiting for white to take on e6. Then we say, thank you very much. We gained the tempo, and we also got a lovely center control with c6, d5. And if white castles, then it's the right moment to capture on e2. And then even we can play bishop f5, solving all our problems immediately. Pragg is taking his time, and probably he very nicely senses that this is kind of a crucial moment, crucial for the fact that every small detail matters here. If he plays nicely, then he will have absolutely zero problems.
Well said. And looking at this position of the computer can be very misleading, because a6 and c6 have almost exactly the same evaluation, and yet they do lead to slightly different pawn structures, and slight differences in the endgame, they accumulate, and you make one or two inaccuracies. Before you know it, your opponent is starting to ask some questions. And when your opponent is Magnus Carlsen, he's not asking nice questions. He's asking rather annoying questions. So Pragg doing a good job here, slowing himself down, making sure that he finds the right way to approach this position, and make sure that he completely neutralizes any potential ideas that Magnus Carlsen might have to put some pressure in this endgame. Okay, well, obviously this position, not the most fascinating position we've had in the World Cup so far. I think we should leave Pragg to ponder his next move, and maybe take a quick look at our other game, at our third place matchup between Caruana and Abasov, which I don't think anybody will disagree with me if I say that it is a slightly more interesting position.
Yes. Wow. Okay, this is a
just a little.
It's a razor sharp position. What happened here? Okay, it had to be 4 knights. However, not 4 knights inside e4, e5. It's in the Sicilian. e6, d4 takes. Yes. Basically, black is inviting white to play knight db5, going for the Sveshnikov, but avoided all the Rossolimos and all these other things like third move knight c3. And here Fabi does not go along for the invitation with knight takes c6, b takes c6, e5, which was a line heavily debated in the World Cup in different matches. Fabi comes up with a surprise bishop f4. Black reacts with bishop b4. And we get into this wildness, knight db5, knight takes e4, queen f3, d5, knight c7 check, king f8, and long castle, the current position. What is your expert opinion on this?
Well, it's funny. I was investigating the four-knight Sicilian, and I'll make two observations. The first is that generally, this position occurs through a slightly different move order, right? White typically plays 6 knight db5, then black plays bishop b4, and in that position,
just a second.
For sure.
Let me even pull it up. Yes, so knight db5. If black does not want to go for the Sveshnikov with d6, then he has bishop b4. The line Sarana played it against Dominguez, I believe.
And the traditional response here is to play a3. Then black takes on c3, and you would understand why Fabi doesn't want to go for this line. If black knows it well, it has a reputation for being among the most sort of drawish Sicilian variations. But bishop f4 is a very fashionable move. It's been featured a lot in recent top-level games, and it leads to these absolutely wild complications. And even looking at these positions for a couple of hours with the top engines sometimes gets you absolutely nowhere. And because the positions are so irrational, and there's like a hanging rook on a8 and a hanging knight on c3, it's so easy to confuse the lines. So Fabi kind of just going, following Mikhail Tal's advice, taking his opponent into a deep dark forest where 2 + 2 = 5, and where there is only a wide enough path for one person to return. So we should also point out why, instead of castles queenside, it's not advisable to take the rook on a8. And I'll drop a hint. I do remember that the response here is supposed to be e5, and this is a viable theoretical continuation. The basic philosophy here for black is that he's got this massive initiative in the center. He's got the pressure on white c3 knight, and he's got the possibility of activating more of his pieces with moves like knight c6 to d4. And of course, the knight on a8 is also easy pickings in the long run for black's queen. So currently black is down a rook, but in the future, if black picks up the knight, then he's only down an exchange. So this is one path, but Fabi decides to delay knight takes 8 and instead to focus on bringing his king to relative safety with long castle. And it's a really bad sign for Abasov fans that he has taken now 6 minutes on his move. Is he remembering his preparation, or is he utterly confused here?
It's a good question. The reason why I sense that you are an expert in this line, that I do remember our coverage of that brilliant victory by Lanier Dominguez against Alexei Sarana. And you did mention that you have been analyzing that position. So I knew that you should be really familiar with all the finesses here. And tell us, can you reveal us that? Did you also analyze the move long castle that happened here? Or
I'm pretty sure I did, but as is usually the case with all my opening analyses, I don't remember anything. But now that bishop takes c3 appears on the board, I'm pretty sure this is the correct approach. In fact, I'm pretty sure this is the only move that leads to a feasible position. Abasov kind of looking up at the stars, which is the universal sign of, a GM trying to remember his preparation. And the point of bishop takes c3 is to take the tension off of the knight on e4. And black usually follows this up by playing e5, I'm pretty sure. After pawn takes c3, e5, we get just complete pandemonium on the board.
Yes, e5 or g5. I also see that computer suggests g5 and e5. We have to mention two completely different positions might arrive. And what? Abasov goes queen e7. Okay, clearly black is eyeing queen a3 check. But white does seem to have this typical idea c4 covering the a3 square. And how is black? And c4 already on the board.
Okay, now this is very interesting because the engine approaches black's idea with a healthy degree of skepticism. c4, defending the a3 square with the queen, but also putting very serious pressure on black's center. let's not forget the rook is still hanging, so that is still hanging over Abasov. Is queen e7 very deep preparation? Has he let the computer sit here for a couple of hours, or has he confused something? That's always the question when you get into these super chaotic lines.
The move queen e7 looks very principled, and it's clear that if you haven't analyzed it, you would not be able to make this move over the board in a couple of minutes. Yeah, it would require half an hour or even 40 minutes for sure to understand all the complications. And we do see that computer already says that if you play the move queen e7, then maybe you have to follow it up with knight b4. Just forget about that rook and try to create counterplay against white's king. The line that I'm seeing here is completely crazy. Let's just show something knight b4 here.
Oh my gosh. And I've got a crazy statistic after you finish. Go ahead.
Yes, then tell us, because I don't know what to suggest here.
Well, I'm just looking also at when this position was first played. Like, has this position ever been reached? And not only has it been reached, but the position after c4 was reached for the first time in 1902. So, I mean, some guy 120 years ago actually got to this position with the black pieces. He played queen f6, which was repeated a couple of times. Knight b4 has been played in correspondence chess. There was a recent game which continued knight b4, a3. Oh my gosh, seatbelts fasten, folks. Knight a2 check, king b2, knight a c3. How many times do you say that? Knight a2 to c3, rook d3, knight a4 check, king c1, queen f6, bishop d6 check, forcing the queens off the board. And finally, bishop d6 check is a big mistake. This was played once in correspondence chess because after knight takes d6, it may seem like, yes, I've traded the queens, I've taken the rook on a8, but you're missing the forest for the trees here. Black has a massive pawn center. The knight on a8 is not getting out. And after something simple like knight takes c4, white is actually much worse in the endgame. So bishop d6 check, big mistake. Instead of that move, it appears that rook to b3, which is one of those typical crazily cold-blooded computer moves, stopping the checkmate threat on a1, gives white an advantage. But oh my gosh, I need an Advil after looking at these lines. This is insane. I mean,
completely
what is
insane.
this?
That's why I passed it on to you. I knew that you are probably already backed with some really great insights. The line is very hard to explain. It's all about force, concrete, direct lines, putting so much pressure on both players. Here it comes very much into counting that who has done his preparation, who has done a better job, in his preparation. I do believe that since Fabi somehow sensed that this line might appear, he was blitzing all his moves. He was the one, probably he felt like the Rossolimo line that Magnus Carlsen employed against Abasov could be very interesting challenge. Maybe Abasov will change already in his second move. Knight f3. What we are talking about after knight c6, bishop b5 would have been played, and it's a very rich middle game with hundreds of different possibilities for both sides. And the move e6 from black side signal that no, I don't want to go into those strategic battles. I want to have a little bit more direct clash where I can rely on some preparation to neutralize the pressure. And then Fabi, anticipating this, sidestep with bishop f4 and forced Abasov into this complete craziness. How will Nijat navigate himself through this jungle? That's a big question.
I mean, to me, if I were looking at this position for the first time, the move played by Miklos Brody, who's the Hungarian master, who played this for the first time in 1902, would be queen f6. I think that is a very logical move because it threatens checkmate on a1. But if you play queen f6 immediately, white can cut off the queen's diagonal by simply playing c3. So, there is some logical basis to black's moves in this position, but I almost feel like, a monkey in this position. I'm just creating mate in one threats, and the engine is coming up with quantum mechanics equations. So I think you're exactly right, Peter. This position is only about one thing. It's not about understanding. It's not about ideas. It's about who has done his homework, who has done it more diligently, and who can actually remember what's in their file. As I say that, Queen F6 is on the board, so they are following the game between Lohman and Brody from 1902. Really, really cool stuff. And we will keep a close eye on this game as Nijat gets up from the board. He doesn't want to look at whatever is going on this board. But we've got two really interesting games here at the World Cup final, the championship match and the third place match. These two positions cannot possibly be any different. We will return to the endgame in the deciding Carlsen-Prag game, as well as the crazy position in Abasov Caruana. But first, we will go on our first break of the day, folks. Stay tuned, all 100,000 of you. We will be back with more World Cup action in just a couple of short minutes.
Hi, I'm Grandmaster Anish Giri, and welcome to Left-Hand Repertoire's 1e4. The so-called Latvian gambit is horrible. F5, knight takes e5. This is not how chess is played. He played too many moves with pawns and the queen, and didn't develop his light pieces. And if knight e4, this is a very important trick to remember. Many people fall for it, actually. Knight to b5, brilliant idea. ab and queen g7, not to rook f8, bishop h6, queen c5 and f3, and surprisingly, queen f2 is almost checkmate, but it's not. If your opponent wants to be solid, we go for the aggressive for the kill. If your opponent wants us to go for the kill, we play simple chess and just use the fact that we have more space in the center, clear-cut plans, and nothing to worry about.
Minute 10 seconds. Every second counts.
Hikaru Nakamura is surviving.
We're rooking 8. Whoa! He blundered his queen. He's got 40 more seconds. He needs to burn. Rookie's losing. Oh my God! He's gonna flag. No!
He flagged! He flagged! He flagged!
Oh my God! Oh my God! He made it! Oh my God!
Strong stairway! Oh, get over the board!
He's just gonna move quickly.
Oh! Oh my gosh! Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the second match game of the finals of the 2023 World Cup from Baku. This is the decisive second match game. Magnus Carlsen or Praggnanandhaa with a victory claim this coveted World Cup title. Should they draw their second game, which seems to be increasingly likely, they will move on to contest a rapid tiebreaker tomorrow. Okay, here we have the bird's eye view. The contrast between these two games could not possibly be any greater. We have a crazy Sicilian in Caruana Abasov and the most symmetrical position of all time in Carlsen-Prag. Peter, I think that this is increasingly becoming a question not of what the result's going to be, but when the peace treaty is going to be signed in the Carlsen-Prag game.
Yes, looking at the position, it does feel like this. However, very quickly, let's just go through the last couple of moves. Because the Fabiano game, we can talk there for hours, but just to bring our viewers up to date, what we think about the Magnus Carlsen Praggnanandhaa game is Queen e2, King e2, c6. So yes, Prag did go for the c6 plan. However, he first traded on e2. It's a very natural, very human way of reacting. Bishop d3, d5. But this did let White play this move c4. Okay, c4 basically doesn't do anything. Yes, White trades his double pawns. Black certainly shouldn't be afraid of that. Takes, and bishop f5 develops with the tempo, hitting the c2 pawn. What do you make of this?
Wait a second. I mean, we're talking about this from the perspective of Magnus calling all the shots, but when I look at this position with sort of an untrained eye, it seems like White's king is the one that's experiencing some discomfort, and Black's king has the safer developing square. If Black castles queenside and gets a rook to the open file and then puts the other rook on e8, you know, it's not all peaches and cherries for White's king. So Magnus has to find a way here, I think, to trade the light-scored bishops quickly and release the pressure on the c2 pawn. So the obvious move here is bishop to d3. That's the move you would like to play. I also think it's an inaccurate move because Black will take on d3. And if you take with the king, you drop the f2 pawn for no compensation, which means you have to accept a major damaging of your pawn structure with cd. Here, Prag will no longer accept a draw. I mean, Black is squarely playing for the win here with pressure on the d3 pawn and against White's king. So I think it's fair to say, Peter, that now Magnus is suddenly the one who has to find maybe one or two accurate moves in order to hold the balance. It appears that rook h to d1 might be the only move which cleanly fits the bill, but that's actually not the easiest move to come up with because it seems to blunder the c2 pawn.
Yeah, not at all. And I also wonder that, for example, if we just played the most simplistic of all, let's get the bishop back to b3. Black plays the move long castles, clearly, and we play the most natural human move, rook he1, preparing to hierarchying back to f1. It does look to me that it's super solid and super safe. I think that maybe there is no need for this computer brilliance with rook hd1, which we have to highlight that, yeah, computers are super smart. Rook hd1, make sure that Black is unable to castle long and invites the capture on the c2 pawn, because after bishop takes c2, White can play rook dc1, hitting the bishop. That bishop needs to retreat, goes back to g6, and then White has these tactics with bishop takes f7 check, and after Black recaptures the bishop, White takes on c5, and we get a completely balanced dead draw position. Yes, rook hd1 is very smart, but it's more computerish than human.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think bishop to b3 is by far the likeliest option. And obviously, we should maybe point out in passing that after Black castles queenside, the f7 pawn technically is hanging, but White can't capture it for a variety of reasons. There's like a symmetrical idea where Black plays rook h f8 and targets both of White's bishops. I think it's an instructive point. In any position, you have to be very attentive to the undefended pieces, the pieces that are not protected by other pieces and pawns. And this is a disaster. If White drops back to b3, then Black has a whole menu of options, but bishop g4 check, f3, rook takes f4 is the simplest, and White's king just gets massacred in the center. F takes g4, rook f2 check, and Black can even establish piggies on the second with rook dd2. Yeah, something tells me we are not going to see this position in this game, but this is just to show that in any position, no matter how sterile, you can find danger and you can find trouble if you're looking for it.
For sure, yes. And now Magnus has to make up his mind. The move bishop b3, clearly it's very solid. On the other hand, Magnus might feel like that, yes, it's not that pleasant, that basically it suddenly turns out that black is white. Yeah, it's a symmetrical position, but white is the one who needs to be a bit precise to make sure that everything is under control. He's taking his time. There could be the argument that he sees this tactic with bishop takes e2 and then white hitting on f7, making the draw. However, I would like to come back 2 moves just to understand that after bishop dc d5, the move c3 c4 is kind of a surprise, because one could argue that, okay, white can maybe try to play something like b4, bishop e7, a4. Eventually, this bishop could be transferred to d4, and then white starts advancing on the queen side with Magnus's type of play. But he did not do that. It's kind of showing that, yes, his main target is just to shut the game down.
Yeah, and I'm a little surprised because it doesn't feel like b4 is such a committal option. It doesn't feel like, okay, this is a risky option. White has burned all his bridges. It feels like b4 strikes a nice balance between not depriving the position of all life whatsoever, but also, you know, maintaining a very solid situation. I don't think Magnus would have any trouble making a draw even in this position if he so chose. But like you said, Peter, he has chosen his agenda for the game. He wants to finish things out, go back to bed, rest up for tomorrow, and he's doing just that. And he has, in fact, uncorked the move rook hd1.
Yes, this is Magnus. No matter how he feels or what his intentions are, if precision is required, he is still very much up to the task. Rook hd1, a very nice move, just signaling that, yes, I might not have the biggest ambition for this game, but if it's required from me to play good chess, I'm capable of. Wonderful, wonderful little touch. I think many Magnus fans can get a lot of courage and a lot of extra energy from seeing Magnus going for rook hd1. Those are these finesses. Yes, in this position, it doesn't really matter because everything seemed to be fine and drawish. But all these nuances that you are able to find the best possible with any position, that's of course Magnus's big strength.
It really is. And Magnus can find good moves in any condition. Obviously, it's one of the most difficult things to play a good game of chess when you're not feeling 100%, whether you're feeling food poisoning or you have the flu or a sore throat. You know, any disruption in your ability to concentrate will really hamper your ability to play a classical game of chess. You know, I'm sure you have your stories, Peter. I have mine about trying to suffer through a tournament when you've got the flu. But it's impressive to me that Magnus just hunkers down and he finds the most accurate move and the quickest way to bail the game out. It reminds me of the time that Magnus played a bullet titled arena from an account called A Man with a Van. And it turned out Magnus got 3rd place. Turned out after the tournament, Magnus had been playing on his phone from a moving vehicle, and he registered for the tournament 30 minutes after it started. Carlsen can play good chess in literally any conditions.
Yes, that's what he is famous for. It's just incredible. I mean, whenever I hear these stories, yeah, that somebody is playing online chess from a moving van and finishes well, then basically you know that this is a genius.
Absolutely. And speaking of genius, our incredibly hardworking producer, Bick, big shout out, points out an interesting line. After bishop takes c2, we discussed rook c1 followed by bishop takes f7 check, restoring material equality. But you can also take the other route. You could go rook c1, bishop g6, and now apparently bishop a6 is a cute way to force a different kind of opposite colored bishop endgame. What's interesting about this move is that if black plays b takes a6, I wouldn't take a draw here with the white pieces. I think after rook takes c5, the crucial detail is that bishop b4, which would be the desirable maneuver, runs into rook e5 check. This drops the bishop. And so black has no easy way to keep the c6 pawn protected. We also know that with the presence of rooks, yes, the opposite colored bishops do give the game a drawish flavor still, but it's not the same as if you would have removed all the rooks. Then you can take a draw. With the rooks on the board, I feel like white is still pushing in this position. So maybe bishop a6 is an even more testing way to bail the game out into an opposite colored bishop position.
Wow, that's actually a very nice idea. However, as usual, the computers are spoiling the fun.
Of course.
They just say, I mean, why do you think about opposite colored bishops if you have the move b6, reinforcing the bishop? Yes, however, it runs into bishop b7. Then the rook moves away to d8, bishop takes e6 check, is met by king e7, and black is perfectly fine. His bishops are wonderful. I don't think that Magnus wants this advantage. It's very nice, and it was fantastic. Big shout out to Big pointing out this line. Looking at Magnus's state of mind, I don't see that we're gonna see this.
Yeah, it doesn't appear that way. And for all of this to happen, Pragg would have to take on c2, and he's not going to do that either. He's going to castle kingside, and this game is going to head at even more breakneck pace toward a peaceful conclusion. Bishop d3 is, of course, the logical follow-up to Magnus Carlsen's previous move. This engineers a trade of light-squared bishops. I think we're likely to see rook f to e8 check, and we're likely to see Pragg declining that trade. I mean, bishop f5 can drop back to e6 in order to keep the d-file closed, because the last thing you want to do with black is give up control of the d-file and allow white to infiltrate the 7th rank. Again, comes back to the fact that no matter how symmetrical the position is, if you're looking for trouble and if you're going to play sloppy, you're going to find trouble.
For sure.
Although this is still a dead draw.
Yes, because black has f6. Yeah, it's kind of very nice that rook d7 is met by rook e7, and black is coming with his king. But in general, everything what you said, I think, stands. That you shouldn't be just assuming that the position is simplified, it's symmetrical. You just cannot relax. You always have to be alert and make sure that, for example, in this position, you know exactly that if it would be white move, yeah, if we just make a passing move, I don't know, a6, let's just put a6, then white plays rook d7 and white is winning already, yes? So the back rank is a big problem for black. Now black is unable to play rook e7 due to rook d8 checkmate. So in all these symmetrical positions, everything comes down to tempo play. Yes, black can solve the problem of the back rank with f6 very nicely, also threatening king f7, and after rook d7 we always have rook e7, no problems. Pragg, however, did not include check. He retreated the bishop immediately to e6.
Interesting choice. He's keeping the king on e2. Maybe he's trying to keep the possibility of rook f to e8 in reserve, kind of keeping that move in his pocket, because if he plays that move, even with the bishop on e6, although it's not a check, it still creates the massive threat of bishop g4 check, and so would probably force white's king to drop back to f1 anyway. So this might be a purely cosmetic difference. What is Magnus going to do here? I mean, he could move his king back on his own volition. He could play king f1. He could play a neutral expansionary move like a2, a4, I think is very likely. One way or the other, there's just so little dynamite in this position that, and so much time on the players' clocks, that I just don't see anything all that interesting happening before a draw is agreed.
Yes, I also feel that we have invested enough time now with this game, and knowing that the other game between Fabiano Caruana and Nijat Abasov is completely wild and crazy, it could be a good choice to jump there. By the way, king f1 has been played. Yeah, this is going to be a very quiet affair.
It is indeed. And I do agree this gives us a good chance to segue into our third place match. If you're just joining us, Nijat Abasov delivering a 26-move victory yesterday of some beautiful tactics and a reeling Fabiano Caruana, who just didn't seem able to recover from his loss against Pragg. A very painful match that was for the American superstar. And now he has to win this game in order to force a tiebreaker tomorrow. All right, so we last saw the position right after Abasov played that move, queen f6. They were following the stem game from 1902. And Abasov only deviates with his last move, c3. blocks the queen's access to the a1 square. There was a mate in 1 threat. And Brody, in that stem game, played rook b8. There was another game in the database where black retreated the queen back to e7, trying to get it back to a3. But Abasov, I think, plays the more logical move and the novelty, which is g7, g5, Peter, which allows bishop d6 check. And that is the first move, which has to be carefully assessed.
Yes, that's for sure. The big question is, we do see Abasov has already burned like 30 minutes on his clock. It signals that it shouldn't be preparation. On the other hand, he made up his mind for this queen e7, queen f6, g5 rather quickly. Yeah, it's kind of a tough decision. We did see, however, that during the whole tournament, Abasov was actually relying on relatively fast play. Yeah, he really believed in his intuition throughout the event, putting also pressure on his opponent's clock. In this regard, seeing him not spending too much time like other people would do makes perfect sense. Now, Fabiano, for the first time, slows down. So clearly, he's out of book. We also see the computer evaluation claiming that white has an advantage. And if you go for this white complication line from the white side, you are automatically assuming that your opponent plays the best computer lines because he's also very well prepared. Otherwise, why would he enter this variation? And at some point, you just ignore lines which clearly give advantage according to a computer. So by now, Fabi is on his own. He's definitely calculating the consequences of bishop d6 check. And where do they lead us?
Well, king g7 is forced because bishop d6 really exposes the downside of black's previous move, which has left the queen exposed. Right now, the knight is overextended. It can't capture on d6. And so black is forced to agree to a transition to this endgame. Now, I'm calling it an endgame, but in reality, it's just as crazy as the middle game, right? The queen's taken off the board don't really lend the position all that much clarity. And I guess the big choice here for white is between the straightforward move, which is knight takes a rook. And I don't quite understand why you can't just take the rook. Let me just stop our thinking right there. Black will probably take the bishop. And the biggest X factor in such positions is whether the knight can make its way out of the cave. And I think the answer here is a resounding yes. I mean, after CD, ED, what's wrong with knight C7? And where is black's compensation for the exchange? Now, the engine is pointing out the more subtle move F3. The engine is saying, listen, not only is my knight not in danger, but it's actually pretty happy to chill on A8 for the time being. Let me cover the E4 square and restrict black's knight before dropping my own knight back to C7. This could just end up being an exchange down position for virtually no compensation. Yes, black has a pawn, but that's not enough in an endgame like this.
Not at all. It's kind of shocking, yeah, when we go through the line. I don't really see the difficulty, and probably the reason why Fabi is not taking so much time, that he's very happy that, okay, his approach of going all in. We did hear Abasov's reaction after yesterday's game that he felt like Fabi did not physically recovered from that incredible intense match against Pragg, which also ended tragically for him. However, for this game, Fabi came with a clear intention to try to play as aggressively, as concretely as possible. And it seems to work. Basically, you give bishop d6 check, king g7, you trade on f6, black has to capture back with the king, you take that rook on a8, the bishop has to be captured, and then you see that after c takes d5, e d5, you are even spoiled with a lovely choice between knight c7 and f3. What else can you ask for?
Yeah, and originally I made the point that the endgame is just as chaotic as the middle game. Well, I take that back. I think I jumped to conclusions. You know, once we start looking at the variation, we discovered that it's essentially all forced. You just take, and then you get the knight out of a8, and you're up in exchange. So I think Bobby might be sitting there saying, this has to be too good to be true, because Nijat goes into, you know, one of the sharpest lines known to man. He doesn't blitz out his moves, but he seems to make his moves pretty confidently. And now he's waltzing right into a technically lost endgame, and Fabi will not hold out forever. He's already played bishop d6 check, and he's calling Abasov's bluff on this.
Absolutely. I mean, what on earth is going on? That's what Fabi is thinking about. After yesterday's loss, it looked like a shocking loss. That's it. The match is kind of lost. I'm already exhausted. How am I going to come back? First of all, he gathers all the mental energy to challenge the opponent into the sharpest line possible. He also kind of anticipated. That was already a super touch by Fabi and his team, sensing that, yes, if Abasov wanting to play the Sveshnikov, but he's experiencing some trouble in Rossolimo, he might switch to this other move order. And then Fabi was ready for it. Also, let's not forget, Abasov himself revealed that he has started this World Cup on the 29th of July. So he's already playing almost for a month. How fresh you can be. Yes, we also heard all this incredible interest in Azerbaijan, Baku, thousands of players there, the audience, the spectators, everybody trying to give him the energy. But after all, he's a human. And Fabi hit him at the weak spot. And it does look to us that Fabi has all the chances of taking this match to the tiebreaks.
Absolutely. And I like that Fabi is slowing down. He's being very professional about this. And the reason is because, you can put the puzzle pieces together in different orders. You don't actually have to take the queen on f6 here. You can start by playing knight takes a8, and likely the game will transpose one way or the other into the endgame we were originally discussing, because it's actually not advisable for black to be the one to trade queens, because remember, white wants the pawn on f3 anyway, because it'll prevent the black knight from jumping back to e4. So this transformation is in white's favor, and knight takes f2. It's also important to point out black will end up down a piece because white will move the bishop. You can't save both rooks, but you can get black's knight for one of the rooks. And of course, again, the crucial bit is that white's knight evacuates via c7 inevitably, and black is just not in time to scramble his forces. So whichever way you turn, you're either down a piece or you're down an exchange. And Fabiano Caruana will take the simplest, the most direct approach. He trades queens. He will take the rook on a8 most likely. And I really feel like the win at that point will be a matter of technique.
I have the same feeling. And it does not even look like it should be such a difficult technique, because queen takes f6, king takes f6 is forced, black can't take back with the knight, then the bishop on d6 is not under attack. Yeah, king f6 played. Now the question that will Fabi include the move cd and then capture on a8? It looks like you can do both ways, but if you can already capture that rook, I believe that he's gonna do that. Is it already played? Not yet, but yeah, look at Fabi. He's about to collect that lovely rook.
Abasov is just down an exchange in an endgame. I mean, there's just nothing else to say at this point. Once the knight gets out of a8, the tactical element of the position dissipates, and you go from crazy middle game directly into technically winning endgame. Abasov has to be feeling very disappointed right now. I mean, clearly the game is not over. He will fight to the last drop of blood. Abasov has shown tremendous fighting spirit throughout the World Cup, but this could not have been a better 15 moves for Fabiano Caruana.
Yeah, it's a dream come true. He was thinking like, how do I get chances to fight back? It's clear we did speak about this. Abasov has mentioned it. Prag has mentioned it. Everybody is talking about this, that getting that third spot, after all, psychologically, it's so important. Yes, Magnus Carlsen revealed in our broadcast, in our interview, that yes, he definitely seems to not participate in the candidates, but the players can never be 100% sure. And if we talk about the candidates, that we also have to kind of explain to our audience that in order to get ready for a candidates, you have to prepare like 2-3 months at minimum. You have to also plan your tournament agenda accordingly. So making sure that you are already at the end of the summer, at the beginning of September, you know that your April schedule for Toronto candidates is fixed. You will agree on tournaments that suits perfectly your preparation for the tournament. You make sure that you have enough time to work on your openings for a couple of months, because just working on openings for a few weeks gets you more and more confused. It's never enough time. so that there is so much at stake that you guarantee that third spot and you don't have to wait before Magnus finally officially decides what's going to happen.
Well described, and Fabiano Caruana waited for you to finish and then patiently took the rook in the corner. Knight takes a8, knight takes d6, going for the most straightforward way to pick up the material. And I think that he will play the move f2, f3. I think you'll see that the c7 square is, accessible. The door is open, so you can play knight c7 only after black moves the bishop away from c8. There's no rush to do it. Man, Bobby, what a win this will be on demand. What a storyline if he can come back and then win the tiebreaker tomorrow. Because after yesterday's game, and he was reeling. That was an uncharacteristic blunder by Fabi. Abasov seemed at some point to have it psychologically maybe in the pocket, but no. Players like Fabiano Caruana, they never quit. They always find the inner strength to bounce back and put up a serious resistance. Okay, shall we go back to our marquee matchup, our championship matchup? I will say the position hasn't gotten that much more interesting, but we know that there are hundreds of thousands of fans literally holding their breath, cheering on their favorite player. Have we any additional intrigue in this position?
Let's take it from there where we left it. After bishop d3, bishop e6, Magnus has anyway played the move king f1. Pragg has played the move rook fe8, so it could have happened from rook fe8, check, king f1, bishop e6. Everything fairly normal. The big question was, how does Magnus wants to deal with his problem on the a2 pawn? The answer is quite clear because he has played the move b3. Black follows it up with a very natural move, rook d8. White sidestep with the rook. The rook d1, rook a1 combo was not so nice. Yeah, white has to shift his rooks out from the corner. h6, rook a d1, king f8, f3, bishop b4, attacking the rook, and rook e4, the last move from Magnus.
And I think a phrase that you used in an earlier broadcast is very pertinent here. The price of a move, right? In any position, the price of a move can be very, very high. So in the Abasov Caruana game, a single mistake, a single inaccuracy can lead you from a dynamically balanced position to a lost position. That's literally what happens. But here the price of a move is pretty low. And the way that manifests itself is in almost every position, you could have 3 or 4 different ways to keep the balance. So for example, here, you can play a7, a5 and support the bishop. You can drop the bishop back to d6. I mean, you could even play an awkward move that Pragg probably won't play, like bishop to e7, and you're actually not really changing the evaluation of the position that much. At absolute worst, you might end up in a very slightly unpleasant position, but this is a pretty low-pressure situation for both players here, but especially for Pragg.
I feel the same. Somehow to me the move bishop d6 looks like the most natural way of not dealing with the issue, because there is no issue, but just you want to have some clarity. Of course, there is another way, a completely different approach that says, you know what, you have done absolutely nothing. I even don't want to trade pieces. Let me even put the bishop on c3. It's a slightly more ambitious move. The reason why it also, again, does not change anything, that probably if white wants, he can just force trades with bishop e5. Yep. And after bishop e5, rook e5, we might be, again, very much in the same shoes like if black would have fallen back with the bishop to d6.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't... I would caution the disappointed chess fan from concluding that the players are just sort of going through the motions and phoning it in. Again, we come back to the fact that Magnus not at 100% physically, making a conscious decision and following through on it. But from Pragg's perspective, he knows that one small inaccuracy and this game can drag on for a couple of hours, and that's the last thing you want, to have to hold even a very slightly worse position against arguably the greatest endgame player of all time. So really good job by Pragg to take his time on every move, make sure that he's not giving Magnus Carlsen any ideas about extending this game any longer than it should go. I think we're likely going to see bishop d6 as well. It just seems like such a simple move that clarifies the situation. Nope. It seems like he's gone to c5 instead. So he's gone one square above d6.
Yeah, it's slightly surprising. I don't know exactly what the bishop is doing on c5. And okay, let's take a look, because this was the position, and Prag has moved his bishop from c5 to b4, hitting the rook.
Oh, so that's a draw offer.
Yes. It's kind of a draw offer. Yeah, rook e4, bishop c5, but I don't know. Somehow, something tells me that Magnus is not the type of person who would repeat like this. He probably doesn't mind the draw, but he wants to play a cleaner move. That's my guess.
So you think he might play something like an expanding move on the king side, or what kind of moves come to mind here for white instead of rook e1?
Difficult to say, because the top line of the engine, g4, is, I think, out of question. You don't want to weaken your structure. The pawn on f3 will be vulnerable. That's clearly not a move. The big question is, does he have a natural kind of move that improves for example, a move like rook de1? Could we play the move rook de1?
Absolutely. And it's a very low risk move. What happens if black plays bishop d5 here and tries to get all the rooks off the board?
Yes.
Probably a draw.
Good question.
Probably a draw.
Yes.
A draw happens. Yeah.
Yes, like in hundreds or thousands of different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically then it's understandable that Prag, first of all, wants to clarify the situation that, okay, I have offered you a repetition. The position is dead draw. Do you really want to finish the game, or are you interested in playing? Because it's also often very important to clarify this situation. Yeah, you can't be playing and the move rook d1 played by Magnus. Okay, we're gonna see bishop d5. We're gonna see all the rook trades on e8. And then we see what's going to happen next.
And yeah, likely that draw offer will happen once the rooks are all off the board, because at that point, I mean, there is literally nothing left to play for. Bishop d5 is a very clean move, right? It forces white's hand. What you don't want to do is start treading water here and giving white a chance to make these small improving moves, right? You give white a bunch of tempi, and then maybe Magnus does contemplate, a setup like g4 or h4 and king g2. So if you can go for a more forcing option, you want to go for a more forcing option. Of course, bishop d5, you have to check the tactics. You have to make sure that there's no bishop d6 related shenanigans. But black controls all of the important squares, all of the important diagonals, and Prag will not waste a second longer on unnecessary decision-making. Bishop d5 on the board. We are trading rooks, and we are heading straight down the path of a rapid tiebreaker tomorrow.
Yes, and this is the point of the format, yeah, that with two draws, after 1-1, we're going to get a dramatic tiebreak. I somehow also felt like if today some of the player wins, then we are missing out on so much action, so much drama. Maybe also the players felt this way. Certainly Prag with the black pieces had to think about the game only, not about the result, just to make sure that you are at your best. But knowing Magnus, that he loves rapid blitz chess very much, he loves tie breaks, it's kind of an understandable decision that he's happy taking this match and this World Cup into that grand finale tomorrow.
And it's a silver lining for all of the chess fans who took time out of their day and watch this game. Yes, it is a bit of a disappointment that we didn't get a more dynamic game, but there's always a positive side, and the positive side is that we get some incredibly exciting rapid play action tomorrow. Of course, let's not jump the gun here. They're still playing. But at this point, I think the result is not in question. Prag exchanges the second pair of rooks, and king e7 is a very careful move. He brings his king up to the center. Bishop c8 is a paper tiger. You can just move the b-pawn up one square or even two squares. There is nothing to fear on the queen side.
Nothing at all. The body language of the players also signals that they know that the game is coming to an end. There is not much to play for. If it's black to move, black probably going to play bishop e6. Yes, on the board already.
c4, bishop e6, and who will be the one to do the honors? Who will be the one extending their hand?
Capture on e6. I think it's again one of those situations when the players will look at each other.
Yep. I think we're moments away. We're moments away from a handshake. And that means moments away from our job continuing tomorrow. And I'm secretly happy, Peter. I don't think anybody watching will begrudge me the point that I really did want deep inside. I wanted a rapid tiebreaker, because what a fitting end this would be to this epic event. As we see h3, h5, Magnus might play g4 here. He might move his king up, but that's it. I mean, these moves are purely symbolic at this point.
Yeah, king e2 played, h3, h5 played before. Black puts everything on the light squares, of course.
There we go.
White has the dark squared bishop. Handshake, draw agreed.
Wow. Well, that kind of game arc, I don't think anybody quite expected. They do make it to 30 moves, but the result of the game was essentially determined by Magnus Carlsen's opening choice. He